Okay, so today I want to cover an extremely controversial topic, and that is, should I buy my ball python from Petsmart? And let me tell you, that was probably the #1 question asked this week underneath some of my videos in the comment sections. As a matter of fact, if you go to some of the reptile forums like ballpythons.net, there's a lot of threads started, and then people jump in and they start commenting. And let me tell you, they get really fired up against buying ball pythons from some of these big box stores like Petsmart and Petco and a lot of these other chain stores. And really, what you really need to understand is you need to understand who these pet stores really are and the audience that they're catering to. Let me tell you, they're not like super into ball pythons like some of us breeders. Let me tell you, you won't find a $10,000 sunset ball python at your local Petsmart. It just won't happen. And really, who they're targeting is pretty much the average person who walks in, is looking for a pet for their kids, and they're looking, all right, should I buy a turtle, a tortoise, a gecko, a ball python? What should I buy for my kids? And they're not really, usually the people shopping at these stores really aren't, insane fanatic over ball pythons like most of us are, on this channel and in some of the forums. And some people are just really, obsessed with the ball python industry and taking that kind of, I would say kind of an investment kind of thinking and bringing it to like a big box store. That is where the challenge lies. Because remember, these guys, what they're probably doing, I don't know all the rules and regulations for the Petco and the Petsmart and all those big stores and really where they're buying their ball pythons from. But I've seen, some of the snakes in there, and this is just kind of my idea and some of my thoughts. I'll go over kind of the pros and cons in this video of what these stores are all about from my perspective. So really, I think what they're really doing is they're looking at wholesalers where they'll wholesale ball pythons. They'll buy them wholesale, turn around and flip them. And the other thing you have to think about is I see probably the #1 comment of people looking at the ball pythons in some of these stores. They say, hey, it's really not the right setup for the ball python. What they really need is a totally enclosed hide with just a little hole in the front so they can peek their head out. That is where they feel safe. Let me tell you, these stores, what they're doing is they're buying snakes and they're flipping them. It's basically, they're just flipping them and selling them for a higher price. They use the profits to pay the rent and the lights and the employees. And that's pretty much what a retail business is. They sell, buy low and sell high and use the profits to run the business. So you kind of have to think about the stores in that mindset. So when you walk in, for example, if you had, I'd say that probably the ideal setup for a ball python is like in these racks behind me. I have ball pythons in every tub. Well, could you imagine this rack in your local PetSmart? Ball pythons for sale, and who's going to go through all the tubs and actually look at all the different snakes? Probably nobody. And so what they do is they put the ball pythons in these displays so people can actually see what they're buying. And keep in mind, these displays are totally enclosed, so you can't actually open them up, reach in and move stuff around to see what the snake looks like. They're pretty much under lock and key. So unless you ask an employee to actually look at the snakes in the enclosure, you'll never see it. So I think it really makes sense to have hides like with 2 ends open, or maybe just some plant material in there, or a small little space that they can crawl under, but you can still see them. But that's not really the ideal setup for a ball python. It really needs a place where it can hide, and completely get out of sight. But you really don't want that at the pet store. You want to be able to see it so you can sell the ball pythons to the customers that come in the store. Probably the other biggest thing that I've seen as far as ball pythons in some of these stores is sometimes they have ball pythons that are too small and they really need to be on live hopper mice, which is essentially the first meal for ball pythons. And let me tell you, sometimes I walk in these stores and I feel like I need to bring a little pocket full of mice in there and just kind of throw some mice in so these snakes can eat. And I've actually talked to some of the employees and they're like, oh yeah, we have a policy against feeding live to any snakes and no live feedings. And that can really be a problem. I've seen some of these snakes that are just too small. They won't take anything else besides the live mouse hoppers, and they get thinner and thinner and thinner and just kind of waste away. And I'd say that is probably one of the biggest complaints on a lot of these reptile forums, that they kind of blame the Petsmart, saying, yeah, you're just not taking care of your snakes right. But I can kind of see the ethical dilemma of feeding live. You really don't want the mice to suffer. So it's but it's really essential as a breeder. And the other thing is I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're buying from some of these wholesalers that wholesale ball pythons. And then the wholesalers, what they do is they come to people like me and they buy ball pythons. So for example, I could go to a wholesaler and I could get rid of all my ball pythons. They'll give me 25% of retail, and what they'll do is they'll double the price, sell it to Petsmart, and Petsmart will double the price and sell it to the public, and that's how they run their business, off of the profits from the markup. So I think it really comes down to the breeder like me, raising these snakes up to the proper size before you wholesale them. And I think a lot of them is pretty much the rule of thumb is they need at least 3 meals before you sell it to the wholesaler. And personally, I like to actually give them 6 or 7 meals before I sell a ball python hatchling, because that is pretty much the time when they'll switch over to frozen thawed rats or mice or anything. And really before that, I think they need a few more meals. And the other thing is I happen to have a ball python here. Check this out. This is my bamboo ball python. I've actually seen some pretty nice snakes at some of these PetSmarts and Petcos. I actually went in one time and saw a pied. I was pretty surprised. And some people, I remember the first time the pied came out in PetSmart, and people were floored, especially the guys that have been doing this for a long time. And they're like, man, I paid $20,000 for my first pied, and now they're in PetSmart selling for $300. I can't even believe it. That's how much the industry has changed. But the other thing I've also seen in some of these stores is they'll sell stuff. I've never actually seen a bamboo like this one. This one happens to be a pastel bamboo, really beautiful snake. But what they'll do is they'll put like single gene animals like pinstripes or lemon blasts with the 2 genes, or some of the lower end single gene stuff, and they'll kind of group them all together and sell them as fancy ball pythons. And it's kind of like going to the feed store and buying some chicks for your kids, and you'll have a whole tub of all these different chickens, and they'll just call them pullets. And a lot of times the employees at the feed store won't even know what the chickens are. And there's a huge difference between egg layers, or some that lay eggs a lot more than others, some that are meat chickens. And pullets are basically just a female chicken. It's a chick. They mix them all together, and they don't even tell you what they are. And sometimes it's kind of the same with ball pythons. You go in there, you're buying a fancy ball python, you really don't know what it is. But a lot of times, if you're just buying a snake for your kid and you just want a nice little pet that you want for your kids, and you really don't care what the genes are, you're not really that worried about it, it's a pretty good place to start, I would say. They're kind of targeting kind of the beginner entry-level ball python people. As a matter of fact, I've never seen one advertised as like a het pied or a het anything in some of these stores. It's usually if it's like a pied, a visual pied, it'll be marked up a little bit more, because I'm sure they paid more for a pied, and a lot of people are really looking for pieds. And I can kind of see it too on the from the side of PetSmart. There's a huge industry for ball pythons. There's a lot of money to be made. You can do really well if you're selling ball pythons, and why not get into it? But it's really not like the morph market side of things, where there's 60,000 snakes to choose from, and there's price points all the way from $50 all the way up to $50,000. It's a completely different industry and a completely different customer base at some of these stores. And some people have complained of mites. They're little tiny, kind of almost like fleas, if you've ever seen mites. And what they do is they look like little tiny, look at this guy, they look like little tiny kind of speckles. These almost look like little tiny mites on here, but they're not mites. There's no mites in my collection. But if you go to some of these stores and there's mites, you may be left with a bad impression. Hey, this store has a snake with mites. And let me tell you, anybody can have mites. Anyone from professional breeders to reptile stores to people at the shows. And even if you're walking by someone's table at the reptile show, one of those mites can crawl on your shirt and you can transport it to your collection. You can infect your collection, let me tell you, especially, I would think, especially if you're dealing with wholesalers that are moving a lot of snakes in and out and trying to get rid of and completely eliminate the mites. Let me tell you, I would think that would be quite the challenge to kind of control that. So, you know, it's not really a thing that you should really count against somebody. I would say if they have mites, what they really need to do is they need to separate them and quarantine them. As a matter of fact, I've seen a lot of these like Petsmarts and Petcos. I was actually, when I first started, I was buying some fancy mice to breed mice as feeders, and actually went in, they said, oh yeah, we got some mice, but they're in quarantine for a couple weeks in a separate building. And I thought, wow, that is really awesome. That is what, you know, the reptile industry needs, and the animal industry, it needs someone to actually quarantine these animals and do that. I thought that was really professional. So if you ask me, should you buy a ball python from one of these stores? I would say it really depends. I mean, if you go in and you see a ball python and it looks really healthy and you want to buy a snake for your kids, I would say it's a great place to buy a snake. But if you're more kind of in an investment kind of side of things, I would think there's other places that can have some higher end stuff, like maybe some reptile stores or maybe even Morph Market. Or if you go to like reptile shows, you know, you'd have a lot more to choose from. So I'm not really associated or affiliated with Petsmart or Petco or any of these stores. I just kind of thought I'd throw out this video and kind of give my insights as far as to what I think as far as buying at these stores, because a lot of people are asking, and a lot of people, I would say, especially in the ball python industry, are really against buying ball pythons at some of these stores. But I think, if you want a snake today and you want a place you can go and buy a snake today, and if there's one right down the street, hey, I would go in, check out the snakes, and I would actually buy one for your kids, especially if it was like for a first pet. You're looking for something pretty inexpensive. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.